The air in the funeral parlor was thick with the scent of formaldehyde and decay, but it wasn't the bodies that chilled the room that night in 1992. In a dimly lit basement in upstate New York, a mortician named Leonard Crane knelt beside a corpse, his trembling hands clutching a syringe filled with a strange, luminescent fluid. His eyes, wild with a mix of fear and obsession, darted to the clock on the wall. It was 3:17 a.m., the hour he believed the veil between life and death was thinnest. He whispered to the body, "You'll tell me your secrets soon." The needle pierced the cold flesh, and for a moment the room seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. What Leonard was doing wasn't preparing a body for burial. It was something far darker, a ritual born from a mind fractured by grief and madness. Welcome to the chilling true story of the psychiatric Undertaker, a case that peels back the curtain on a macabre practice hidden inside a small-town funeral home. This isn't just a tale of death, it's a descent into the abyss of a man's psyche, where the line between science and insanity blurred into something unspeakable. What drove a respected mortician to experiment on the dead? What secrets did he believe he could unlock from their silent lips? And what did he uncover that left an entire community questioning the safety of their own minds? From the very first moment, this story will grip you with a cocktail of dread and fascination. You'll feel the weight of Leonard's obsession, the icy touch of his discoveries, and the horror of a truth that no one was prepared to face. Could a man so consumed by loss truly believe he could speak to the dead? Or was something else, something far more sinister, guiding his hand? Stay with us until the end, because the answers will challenge everything you think you know about the human mind, morality, and the boundaries of life itself. This case reveals a haunting truth. Even in the quietest towns, the human mind can harbor secrets so dark they threaten to unravel reality itself. It's a reminder that madness doesn't always scream. It can whisper softly, in the flicker of a mortician's lamp, behind the locked doors of a funeral home. How far would you go to uncover the truth about death? And what if that truth turned out to be more terrifying than you could ever imagine? If you're ready to dive into this unsettling journey, hit that like button to help others uncover the dark secrets of this case. In the comments, leave the phrase, "I'm ready to discover the truth about Leonard Crane." By doing so, you're joining a community of truth seekers who dare to face the shadows of the human psyche. Thank you for being here, for choosing to explore the mysteries that others shy away from. You're one of us now, a seeker of the inexplicable. Prepare yourself, because what comes next contains a key revelation that will forever change the way you see the human mind. In the small town of Coldwater, New York, in the autumn of 1992, Leonard Crane was a man who carried the weight of death with a peculiar grace. To the townsfolk, he was the unassuming owner of Crane's Funeral Home, a modest brick building on the edge of Main Street, its faded sign creaking in the wind. His soft voice and meticulous demeanor made him a pillar of quiet reliability. Someone who handled grief with care, preparing loved ones for their final rest with a reverence that earned him trust. But beneath his pressed suits and somber nods, something was unraveling. Leonard hadn't always been this way. Once a man of warmth, with a wife and a daughter who filled his life with light, he was now a shadow of himself, hollowed out by a tragedy that no one in Coldwater dared to mention in his presence. 10 years earlier, in 1982, Leonard's world had collapsed. His wife Eleanor and their 6-year-old daughter Clara were killed in a car accident on a rain-slicked road just outside town. The crash was brutal. Eleanor's car had skidded into a ravine, the vehicle crumpling like paper. Leonard, who had been working late at the funeral home, was the one to prepare their bodies for burial. The task broke something inside him. Friends noticed the change almost immediately, the way his hands trembled when he spoke, the way his eyes lingered on the embalming table as if searching for something. He began spending more time alone in the basement of the funeral home, locking the door behind him. Whispers spread through Coldwater. Leonard was grieving, yes, but there was something else, something unsettling in his solitude. By 1992, Leonard's grief had festered into an obsession. He became consumed with the idea that death wasn't the end, that the dead held secrets, fragments of consciousness that could be accessed if only he could find the right method. He pored over ancient texts, medical journals, and forbidden manuscripts, piecing together a theory that he believed could bridge the gap between life and death. His studies led him to a dangerous hypothesis: that the human body, even after death, retained a faint electrical charge, a kind of soul imprint that could be manipulated with the right chemicals and techniques. This wasn't just science. To Leonard, it was a desperate plea to reconnect with Eleanor and Clara, to hear their voices one last time. In the basement of the funeral home, Leonard began his experiments. He worked in secret, under the cover of night, when the town slept and the world felt still. The bodies that came through his doors, accident victims, the elderly, those claimed by illness, became more than clients. They were his subjects. He developed a concoction, a strange blend of formaldehyde, rare herbs, and a synthetic compound he'd sourced from a shady chemist in Albany. He called it the elixir, believing it could stimulate the neural pathways of the recently deceased, coaxing them to reveal what lay beyond. Each injection was a ritual, performed with a reverence that bordered on worship. He spoke to the bodies, asking them questions, waiting for signs, a twitch, a whisper, anything to prove he wasn't mad. But the experiments weren't without consequence. The basement began to take on an eerie atmosphere, even during the day. Embalming fluid bottles rattled on their shelves without cause. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Leonard's assistant, a young woman named Marjorie Tate, started to notice strange smells, not the usual chemical tang of the mortuary, but something sour, almost alive. She'd hear Leonard muttering to himself late at night, his voice carrying through the vents words like, "Speak to me and I'm so close." Marjorie, unnerved but loyal, kept her concerns to herself, chalking it up to Leonard's grief. She didn't know that what he was doing would soon draw the attention of someone, or something else. One night in October, as Leonard injected the elixir into the body of a young man killed in a hunting accident, he saw something that made his heart stop. The man's fingers twitched, not the random spasms of rigor mortis, but a deliberate curl as if reaching for something. Leonard leaned closer, his breath shallow, and whispered, "Are you there?" The room grew colder, the air heavy with a presence that felt wrong. For the first time, Leonard wondered if he'd gone too far, if the secrets he was chasing weren't meant to be found. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when he was so close to hearing Clara's voice again. The October chill had settled over Coldwater, New York in 1992, wrapping the town in a fog that clung to the streets like a shroud. In the basement of Crane's funeral home, Leonard Crane's experiments were spiraling into something he could no longer fully control. The twitch of the young hunter's fingers had ignited a fire in him, a dangerous blend of hope and dread. He was no longer just a grieving man seeking closure. He was a scientist on the edge of a discovery that could rewrite the rules of life and death, or so he told himself. Night after night, he descended into the basement, the door locked behind him. The hum of the flickering fluorescent lights his only companion, but the air felt heavier now, as if the room itself were watching, waiting. Leonard's elixir had become more potent, its formula refined through sleepless nights of trial and error. He'd begun to notice patterns. Bodies injected within the first few hours of death responded more than those left too long. A faint muscle tremor here, a flutter of eyelids there. He documented everything in a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with frantic notes, chemical equations, and sketches of neural pathways. But it wasn't just physical responses he was chasing. Leonard swore he heard whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to rise from the bodies when the elixir took hold. Were they fragments of consciousness, echoes of the soul? Or was his mind, frayed by grief and exhaustion, conjuring what he so desperately wanted to believe? The funeral home itself began to change. Marjorie Tate, Leonard's assistant, couldn't ignore the signs any longer. The basement, once a sterile workspace, now felt like a place where the air itself was alive with unease. Tools would go missing, only to reappear in places she hadn't left them. The embalming table, scrubbed clean after every procedure, would sometimes bear faint, inexplicable stains, smudges that looked like fingerprints but weren't quite human. One morning, she found a syringe filled with Leonard's glowing elixir, lying on the floor, its needle bent as if it had been forcibly removed from something. When she asked Leonard about it, his eyes darted away, and he muttered something about working late. Marjorie's loyalty was wearing thin, but she stayed, bound by a mix of pity and fear. Outside the funeral home, Coldwater was beginning to stir with unease. Rumors had started to spread, carried by hushed voices in the town's diner and church pews. A groundskeeper at the local cemetery claimed he'd seen lights flickering in the funeral home's windows, long after midnight. A grieving widow picking up her husband's ashes swore she'd heard a low guttural sound coming from the basement as she passed by the stairwell. Most dismissed these stories as small-town gossip, the kind that thrives in places where boredom meets superstition, but others weren't so sure. Something about Leonard had changed. His once steady hands now shook, and his smile, once comforting, felt like a mask. Leonard, oblivious to the whispers in town, was consumed by his work. He began to focus on a single body, a teenage girl named Sarah Wells who had drowned in a nearby lake after a boating accident. Her death was a tragedy that had shaken Coldwater, and her parents had entrusted Leonard with her preparation, unaware of his secret experiments. Sarah's body was fresh, her death only hours old when Leonard brought her to the basement. He felt a strange connection to her, perhaps because she was close to Clara's age when his daughter died. As he prepared the elixir, his hand steadied and he whispered to her, "You're going to help me, aren't you?" The injection was precise, the needle sinking into her arm as the room grew still. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her lips parted and a sound, low, guttural, and impossibly human, filled the silence. Leonard froze, his heart pounding. The sound wasn't a word, not yet, but it was something. He leaned closer, his ear inches from her mouth, straining to make sense of it. The air grew colder, the lights dimming until they cast long, distorted shadows across the walls. The sound came again, sharper this time, like a voice trying to break through static. Leonard's journal lay open beside him, and he scribbled furiously, trying to capture the moment. "She spoke," he wrote, underlining the words 3 times. But as he stared at Sarah's lifeless face, a new fear crept in. What if this wasn't Clara reaching out to him? What if he'd awakened something else entirely? Something that wasn't meant to return? The guttural sound from Sarah Wells's lips hung in the air like a fog, thick and oppressive, in the basement of Crane's funeral home that fateful October night in 1992. Leonard Crane, his face inches from the girl's pallid features, felt a surge of exhilaration mixed with an undercurrent of terror that made his skin crawl. The sound repeated, morphing from a mere rumble into something resembling a syllable, broken, distorted, but undeniably vocal. It wasn't Sarah's voice. He knew that much from the photos her parents had provided, showing a lively girl with a bright laugh. This was deeper, raspier, like an echo trapped in a well struggling to surface. Leonard's mind raced, piecing together fragments from his research. Ancient accounts of necromancy, modern studies on residual brain activity post-mortem. Was this the breakthrough he'd been chasing, or had he pierced a veil he shouldn't have? He pulled back, his breath coming in short gasps, and fumbled for his journal. The pages fluttered under his trembling fingers as he noted the time. 2:43 a.m. Subject SW exhibits vocalization 17 minutes post-injection, he wrote, his handwriting erratic. The elixir's luminescent glow still pulsed faintly in her veins, visible under the thin skin of her arm. Leonard had refined the formula further that week, adding a trace of a psychoactive compound he'd obtained through back channels, something meant for psychiatric trials, but never approved. It was supposed to enhance neural firing, but now, as the sound faded into silence, he wondered if it had done more than that. The room felt charged, the air humming with an energy that prickled his scalp. He glanced at the shadows on the wall. They seemed to shift, almost as if forming shapes, faces perhaps, or hands reaching out. Upstairs, the funeral home was quiet, but Marjorie Tate couldn't sleep. She'd taken to staying late, telling herself it was to help with paperwork, but really it was worry that kept her there. That night she'd heard the sound too, a muffled groan that carried through the floorboards. Creeping down the stairs, she pressed her ear to the basement door, her heart pounding. What she heard next chilled her. Leonard's voice, soft and pleading. "Tell me more. Please speak again." Marjorie backed away, her mind reeling. Leonard had always been kind to her, hiring her straight out of mortuary school when no one else would. But this was madness. She debated confronting him, but fear held her back. Instead, she slipped out the back door, the cold night air slapping her face as she hurried home, vowing to quit in the morning. Back in the basement, Leonard coaxed another response from Sarah's body. He adjusted the dosage, injecting a smaller amount into her neck, closer to the brainstem. The reaction was immediate. Her head lolled slightly and the sound returned clearer this time. Pain. Cold. The words were fragmented, whispered on an exhale that shouldn't have been possible without lungs drawing breath. Leonard's eyes widened, tears streaming down his face. This wasn't Clara, but it was proof that something lingered after death. He pressed on, asking questions. Who are you? What do you see? The responses came sporadically, painting a picture of confusion, of a void filled with echoes of life. But as the session wore on, the voice changed, growing agitated, accusatory. Why, disturb us? It rasped, and Leonard felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. The experiments escalated from there. Leonard began selecting bodies with more care, favoring those with sudden traumatic deaths, believing their imprints were stronger. A construction worker crushed by falling scaffolding, an elderly woman who succumbed to a heart attack mid-prayer. Each became a canvas for his elixir. The whispers multiplied, filling his nights with a cacophony of voices that only he could hear. He started recording them on an old tape deck, playing them back during the day, analyzing every nuance. Patterns emerged, recurring themes of regret, unfinished business, and warnings. "Leave us," one voice pleaded. "Danger," another hissed. Leonard dismissed them as artifacts of the process, his obsession blinding him to the growing peril. In Coldwater, the unease spread like a virus. At the local bar, patrons shared stories over beers. A man swore he'd seen Leonard digging in the cemetery at dusk, though no one could confirm it. Sarah Wells's parents, still raw from their loss, visited the funeral home to finalize arrangements and noticed Leonard's disheveled appearance, his eyes bloodshot, his clothes rumpled. "Is everything all right?" her father asked. Leonard smiled thinly, assuring them it was, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the voices. That night, as he prepared another body, the whispers turned personal. "Eleanor, Clara, waiting," a voice said, and Leonard's world tilted. Was this real or his mind fracturing further? The basement had become a chamber of horrors littered with syringes, journals, and tapes. The air reeked of the elixir's acrid scent, mingled with the ever-present odor of decay. Leonard rarely slept, sustained by coffee and mania. He began to see things, fleeting glimpses of figures in his peripheral vision gone when he turned. One night, as he injected a new subject, the body convulsed violently, far beyond a twitch. Its hand shot up, grasping Leonard's wrist with impossible strength. The voice that emerged was a scream. "Stop!" Leonard wrenched free, his arm bruised, but the incident only fueled his drive. He was close, so close to bridging the gap. Marjorie, true to her vow, didn't return the next day. Her absence left Leonard isolated, but he barely noticed, lost in his work. The town, however, was starting to connect the dots. A local doctor, Dr. Harlan Brooks, who had referred bodies to Cranes, grew suspicious after hearing rumors. He paid an unannounced visit, but Leonard turned him away, claiming illness. Dr. Brooks left unsettled, the funeral home's atmosphere lingering on him like a bad dream. Little did he know, the true nightmare was just beginning to unfold. The scream that erupted from the convulsing body echoed through the basement like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile illusion of control Leonard Crane had clung to in that dim, chemical-laced chamber of Crane's funeral home in 1992. His wrist throbbed where the cold fingers had gripped him, leaving purple bruises that pulsed with each heartbeat. He staggered back, knocking over a tray of instruments that clattered to the floor in a cacophony of metal. The body, a middle-aged farmer named Elias Grant, who had died from a fall off his tractor, lay still now, its eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. But the air vibrated with the aftermath of that unnatural outburst. Leonard's mind reeled. This wasn't the gentle whisper he'd coaxed from Sarah Wells or the fragmented pleas from others. This was rage, raw and undirected, as if something trapped had lashed out in warning. He sank to the floor, his back against the cold wall, and buried his face in his hands. The tapes from previous sessions lay scattered around him, their reels silent now but filled with voices that haunted his thoughts. Eleanor, Clara, waiting. Those words from the last experiment replayed in his head, a siren call that drowned out the fear. Was it possible? Could his family be reaching through the veil, using these bodies as conduits? Or was he descending into the same madness that had claimed so many in the psychiatric cases he'd read about in his forbidden books? Men who tampered with the unknown and paid dearly. Leonard shook his head, forcing himself to stand. He couldn't stop now. The bruises were proof of progress, not peril. He cleaned up the mess, disposed of Elias's body with mechanical precision, and prepared for the next one. Word of Marjorie's abrupt departure spread quickly in Coldwater, fueling the already simmering rumors. She had confided in a close friend at the diner, whispering about strange noises and Leonard's erratic behavior, and soon the town was abuzz. Dr. Harlan Brooks, the local physician, decided to take matters into his own hands. He was a pragmatic man, in his 50s, with a no-nonsense approach honed from years of treating everything from flu outbreaks to farm accidents. But even he felt a twinge of unease as he approached Crane's funeral home one crisp morning. The building looked the same, neat, unassuming, but there was an aura about it, like a house where tragedy had lingered too long. He knocked firmly, and when Leonard answered, pale and unshaven, Dr. Brooks pushed inside without invitation. "Leonard, we need to talk," he said, his voice steady but laced with concern. Leonard led him to the parlor upstairs, away from the basement's secrets. They sat amid the velvet-draped coffins on display, the air heavy with the scent of lilies. Dr. Brooks cut to the chase. "I've heard things about late nights, odd sounds, and Marjorie quitting like that. It's not like her." Leonard's eyes flickered, but he maintained composure, attributing it all to grief and overwork. "I'm fine, Harlan, just processing." But Dr. Brooks wasn't convinced. He noticed Leonard's bruised wrist, partially hidden by his sleeve, and pressed further. "If you need help, there's no shame in it. I can refer you to a specialist in Albany, someone who deals with mental health." The words hung between them, unspoken accusations of instability. Leonard bristled inwardly but smiled thinly. After Dr. Brooks left, unsatisfied but without proof, Leonard retreated to the basement, his resolve hardening. The visit had rattled him, making him more secretive. He began conducting experiments only in the dead of night when the town was asleep, and installed a heavier lock on the basement door. His next subject was a vagrant found frozen in an alley, unidentified and unclaimed, perfect for his needs, with no family to ask questions. As he administered the elixir, the voices returned, more insistent. This time they spoke of visions. Darkness, pulling. "Don't follow." Leonard ignored the warnings, probing deeper. "Where are Eleanor and Clara?" he demanded. The response came as a whisper. "Here. With us." But changed. The revelations fueled a manic phase. Leonard expanded his research, delving into psychiatric literature he'd smuggled from a library in Syracuse. He read about dissociative disorders, where minds fractured under trauma, creating alternate realities. Was that what was happening to him? Or were the voices genuine echoes from beyond? He began to experience hallucinations outside the experiments. Glimpses of Eleanor in the hallway, Clara's laughter echoing faintly. Sleep evaded him, replaced by feverish note-taking. His journal grew thicker, pages filled with diagrams of brain waves, chemical breakdowns of the elixir, and transcriptions of the voices. One entry detailed a session where a body sat up abruptly, its eyes rolling back and intoned. "The door is open. They come through." Coldwater's suspicion deepened. A group of concerned citizens, led by the town's mayor, a burly man named Tom Riley, discussed confronting Leonard. Riley had buried his own mother at Crane's the previous year, and now wondered about irregularities. But without evidence, they hesitated. Meanwhile, strange occurrences plagued the town. Pets howling at night, unexplained cold spots in homes near the funeral parlor. One woman claimed to see a shadowy figure in her window, whispering her name. Superstition ran rampant, blending with the practical fears of a man losing his grip. Leonard's isolation grew. He stopped attending church, avoided the grocery store, having supplies delivered. His appearance deteriorated, gaunt cheeks, wild eyes. Yet his experiments yielded more. Coherent sentences now, stories from the dead about their lives, regrets, and glimpses of an afterlife that sounded more like a purgatory. Trapped. Echoes. Release us, one pleaded. Leonard began to believe he was a medium, not a madman. His psychiatric unraveling a necessary sacrifice. But the cost was mounting. During one session, as a voice described Clara's favorite toy, Leonard felt a presence behind him, a cold breath on his neck. He spun around to nothing, but the fear lingered. Dr. Brooks, undeterred, reached out to authorities in Albany, suggesting an investigation into the funeral home's practices. Letters were sent, wheels set in motion. Unbeknownst to Leonard, the net was closing. That night, as he prepared another injection, the basement lights flickered violently and a chorus of voices erupted without prompt. "He's coming. Stop him." Leonard paused, needle hovering, wondering who he was. The answer would come sooner than he thought, pulling him deeper into the abyss. The chorus of voices faded into a haunting silence in the basement of Crane's funeral home, leaving Leonard Crane frozen with the needle poised above the pale skin of his latest subject, a homeless man whose death from exposure had gone unnoticed by the world. The words, "He's coming. Stop him," echoed in his mind, a cryptic prophecy that sent shivers down his spine despite the stuffy air of the room. Who was he? A figment of his fracturing psyche, or a genuine warning from the beyond? Leonard lowered the syringe, his hand unsteady, and stepped back, scanning the shadows that danced under the flickering lights. The basement felt smaller, the walls closing in as if the space itself were alive with anticipation. He wiped sweat from his brow, the elixir's glow reflecting in his widened eyes, and whispered to the empty air, "Who? Tell me who." But the voices were silent now, leaving him alone with his doubts. As the night wore on, Leonard tried to shake off the unease, attributing it to exhaustion. He completed the injection, but the response was muted. A few garbled words about loss and darkness, nothing new. He recorded it dutifully in his journal, but his thoughts kept drifting to the warning. Outside, the town of Coldwater slumbered under a blanket of stars, unaware of the storm brewing in its midst. Dr. Harlan Brooks, restless in his bed, couldn't let go of his suspicions. The next morning he drove to Albany, a 2-hour journey through winding roads lined with autumn foliage. There he met with a contact at the state health department, a stern woman named Evelyn Grant who oversaw funeral home regulations. "Something's off with Leonard Crane," he confided over coffee in her office. "Rumors of odd behavior late nights. I think he needs checking." Evelyn nodded, promising to look into it, though bureaucracy moved slowly. Back in Coldwater, Mayor Tom Riley convened an informal meeting at the town hall with a few key residents, the sheriff, a pastor, and a couple of business owners. The rumors had grown too loud to ignore. Strange lights, eerie sounds, Leonard's reclusive ways. "We can't let this slide," Riley said, pounding the table. "If he's tampering with bodies, that's desecration." The sheriff, a pragmatic man named Bill Harlan, no relation to the doctor, agreed to pay a visit, though without probable cause it would be friendly. As they spoke, Leonard was in the basement dissecting his latest tapes. The voices were evolving, mentioning names now, including his own. "Leonard, danger coming." He paced, his mind a whirlwind of theories. Perhaps the he was death itself or a rival spirit. His psychiatric decline was evident in his unkempt appearance, the way he muttered to himself even during daylight hours. The sheriff's visit came that afternoon. Bill knocked on the funeral home's door, his badge gleaming in the sun. Leonard answered, forcing a smile. "Sheriff, what brings you here?" They sat in the parlor, the air thick with tension. Bill probed gently. "Heard some concerns from folks. You doing all right?" Leonard deflected, blaming grief, but his bruised wrist caught the sheriff's eye. "Accident," Leonard said quickly. Bill left unconvinced, reporting back to Riley. "He's hiding something." The net tightened subtly. Neighbors watched the funeral home more closely, noting deliveries of unusual chemicals. One evening, a curious teenager snuck close to a window, peering into the basement. He saw Leonard hunched over a body, syringe in hand, and fled, spreading the tale at school the next day. Leonard's experiments intensified, driven by the warnings. He adjusted the elixir, adding a sedative to calm the responses, hoping for clarity. With a new body, an accident victim from a car crash, he injected and waited. The voice that emerged was clear. "The doctor. He knows. Stop before it's too late." Leonard's heart raced. Dr. Brooks? Was he the he? Paranoia set in. He began seeing shadows outside, hearing footsteps that weren't there. He barricaded the basement door, sleeping downstairs with a baseball bat for protection. His journal entries grew erratic, blending science with delusion. The dead are my allies. They warn me of the living. The psychiatric fracture deepened, memories of Eleanor and Clara merging with the voices, creating hallucinations of his family standing beside the embalming table, urging him on. In Albany, Evelyn Grant pulled Crane's records, noting irregularities in supply orders, excessive chemicals not standard for embalming. She scheduled an inspection for the following week, alerting local authorities. Dr. Brooks, back in town, confided in Marjorie Tate, who had found new work at a florist. I heard things down there, she admitted tearfully. Voices like he was talking to the dead. The pieces fell into place for Brooks. He suspected a breakdown, perhaps schizophrenia exacerbated by grief. He researched similar cases, reading about morticians who lost their minds, tampering with bodies in bizarre rituals. One historical account from France of an Undertaker obsessed with corpses mirrored Leonard's path too closely. The town buzzed with speculation. At the diner, patrons debated, he's gone mad. Maybe he's a necromancer. Superstition blended with concern, some avoiding the funeral home altogether. Leonard, sensing the shift, grew more isolated, his world shrinking to the basement. One night, as thunder rumbled outside, he conducted his boldest experiment yet. Multiple injections on a single body, pushing the limits. The response was explosive. The body jerked, voices overlapping in a babel of warnings. He's here. The end, run. Leonard spun toward the door, hearing a knock upstairs, insistent, authoritative. His pulse thundered. The confrontation he'd feared was at hand. The insistent knocking reverberated through the empty halls of Crane's funeral home, cutting through the storm's rumble like a harbinger of doom on that turbulent November evening in 1992. Leonard Crane, still reeling from the chaotic outburst of voices in the basement, ascended the stairs with a caution born of paranoia, his baseball bat gripped tightly in one hand. The warnings from the dead echoed in his ears. He's here. The end. Run it, fueling a dread that twisted his gut. Rain lashed against the windows, blurring the outside world into a watery haze, but through the peephole, he could make out a figure. Sheriff Bill Harlan, his uniform sodden flashlight beam piercing the darkness. Leonard's mind raced. Was this the he the voices had foretold? He hesitated, then opened the door a crack, the chain still latched. Sheriff, it's late. What do you want? Bill Harlan's face was grim under his hat's brim, water dripping from it. Leonard, we need to talk. Now. His tone left no room for argument, and Leonard, sensing the inevitability, unlatched the door and stepped aside. The sheriff entered, shaking off the rain, his eyes scanning the dimly lit foyer with a lawman's scrutiny. They moved to the parlor, where the air hung heavy with the scent of stale flowers and unspoken secrets. Bill wasted no time. I've got complaints, Leonard. Folks saying strange things about this place, noises, lights, you acting off. And now word from Albany about an inspection. Leonard's blood ran cold. Dr. Brooks had followed through. He feigned ignorance. Inspection for what? But Bill pressed on, mentioning Marjorie's stories, the teenager's sighting, the chemical orders. If you're in trouble, mentally or otherwise, we can get you help. But if you're desecrating bodies... The accusation hung like a noose. Down in the basement, the body on the table lay silent, but Leonard imagined the voices stirring, urging him to confess or flee. His psychiatric unraveling was at a tipping point. Hallucinations flickered at the edges of his vision, Eleanor's face in the shadows, Clara's small hand reaching out. He denied everything, his voice steady despite the turmoil. It's grief, Sheriff, nothing more. But Bill wasn't buying it. He requested a look around, starting with the basement. Leonard's heart pounded. Refusal would confirm suspicions. Reluctantly, he led the way down the stairs, the bat left behind but his mind arming itself with lies. The basement door creaked open, revealing the chaos. Scattered syringes, glowing elixir vials, the journal open on the table. Bill's flashlight swept over it all, his expression hardening. What the hell is this, Leonard? Leonard stammered an explanation. Research into better embalming techniques, nothing illegal. But as Bill approached the body, a low hum filled the room, the lights flickering. The sheriff paused, unnerved. You hear that? Leonard nodded, sweat beading on his forehead. Then, without injection, the body's lips moved, a whisper escaping. Go. Away. Bill jumped back, his hand on his gun. What was that? Leonard's world spun. The voices were manifesting without his prompting, the veil thinning dangerously. He tried to dismiss it as a trick of the wind, but Bill was shaken, demanding answers. The confrontation escalated, Bill radioing for backup, insisting Leonard come to the station for questioning. As they argued, the storm intensified, thunder shaking the foundation. Leonard's mind fractured further, memories flooding in. The crash that took his family, the endless nights of loneliness, the first twitch from a body that ignited his obsession. He saw this as persecution, the living jealous of his connection to the dead. In a moment of desperation, he lunged for a syringe, jabbing it into his own arm, the elixir meant for the deceased now coursing through his veins. Bill drew his gun. "Leonard, stop!" But it was too late. The compound hit Leonard like a wave, amplifying his hallucinations. Voices exploded in his head, a symphony of the dead screaming warnings and pleas. He collapsed, convulsing, visions of Eleanor and Clara vivid and accusing. "Why did you bring us back?" Bill, horrified, called for an ambulance, securing the scene. Backup arrived. Deputies who cordoned off the funeral home, their flashlights revealing the extent of Leonard's madness. Tapes labeled with dates and names. Journals detailing conversations with the deceased. Empty vials strewn about. The town awoke to sirens and lights, rumors exploding into reality. By morning, Coldwater was in an uproar, reporters from nearby cities descending like vultures. Dr. Brooks was called in, examining Leonard at the hospital where he was stabilized but incoherent. Muttering about voices and doors opened. The investigation unfolded rapidly. Evelyn Grant from Albany arrived earlier than planned, her team poring over records. They found altered documents, bodies with unexplained puncture marks, chemical analyses confirming the elixir's psychoactive properties, a mix that could induce hallucinations in the living but had unknown effects on the dead. Psychiatric experts were consulted, diagnosing Leonard with severe delusional disorder, compounded by prolonged grief and isolation. His experiments were deemed a macabre form of self-therapy, a man trying to resurrect his family through science and superstition. But questions lingered, the unexplained sounds, the movements witnessed by others. Was it all in Leonard's mind, or had he tapped into something real? In the hospital, Leonard's condition worsened. Under sedation, he spoke of a psychiatric Undertaker, himself burying sanity to exhume truths from death. Visitors, including Marjorie, came and went, her pity mixed with revulsion. The voices, he claimed, were still there, fainter but persistent. "They want release," he whispered to Dr. Brooks during an evaluation. The doctor noted it as delusion, but privately wondered. Science knew little about the dying brain's final firings. The case drew parallels to historical figures like Victor Frankenstein or real-life body snatchers, but with a psychiatric twist. Coldwater changed overnight. The funeral home was shuttered, bodies redirected elsewhere. Locals avoided the building, claiming it haunted. Strange occurrences continued. Knocks at night, whispers in the wind. One deputy guarding the site swore he heard voices from the basement, fleeing in terror. The media dubbed it the Psychiatric Undertaker case, sensationalizing the macabre practices. Leonard's trial loomed, charges of corpse abuse and illegal experimentation pending. But in his cell-like hospital room, he plotted his defense, proof via tapes, demonstrations if allowed. The abyss he'd stared into stared back, pulling him deeper. As winter approached, the investigation revealed more. Hidden compartments in the basement with relics, old photos of Eleanor and Clara, mingled with anatomical drawings. A secret diary exposed Leonard's descent, entries from 1982 onward chronicling his grief's evolution into obsession. Psychiatric reports painted a picture of a man whose mind, once sharp, had splintered under trauma, creating a reality where death spoke. Yet some tapes, when played, captured anomalies, voices not Leonard's, defying explanation. Skeptics called them hoaxes. Believers saw evidence of the paranormal. The case blurred lines between madness and mystery, leaving Coldwater forever marked. The winter winds howled through Coldwater, New York in early 1993, carrying with them the chill of unresolved mysteries that had gripped the town since the night Sheriff Bill Harlan uncovered Leonard Crane's basement horrors. The funeral home stood abandoned, its windows boarded up like eyes shut against the truth, while the community grappled with the fallout of what had been unearthed. Leonard, now confined to a psychiatric ward in Albany under heavy sedation and constant observation, awaited his fate. Charges had been filed. Multiple counts of corpse abuse, illegal possession of controlled substances, and fraud for altering death certificates to cover his experiments. But the case was far from straightforward. The tapes and journals presented a puzzle that divided experts, delusion or something supernatural. As preparations for the trial began, investigators delved deeper, unearthing layers of Leonard's psyche that painted a portrait of a man teetering on the edge of genius and insanity. In the sterile confines of the Albany Psychiatric Center, Leonard underwent rigorous evaluations. A team of psychiatrists led by Dr. Miriam Voss, a specialist in trauma-induced disorders, spent hours interviewing him. Leonard, his once sharp features now gaunt and shadowed by stubble, spoke in fits and starts. "The voices are real," he insisted, his eyes darting to corners of the room as if expecting spectral visitors. "I opened a door and now it won't close. Doctor?" Voss noted his symptoms: auditory hallucinations, paranoid ideation, and a dissociative state where he believed himself a conduit for the dead. She diagnosed him with schizoaffective disorder, exacerbated by prolonged grief and self-medication via his elixir, a brew that chemical analysis revealed contained hallucinogens capable of inducing vivid visions even in small doses. Yet when they played the tapes in her presence, faint whispers emerged that audio experts couldn't fully explain away as artifacts or forgeries. Background noise, some said. Anomalies, others whispered. The prosecution built their case meticulously. District Attorney Elena Ramirez, a sharp-minded woman from Syracuse, portrayed Leonard as a dangerous charlatan who exploited the dead for personal gain, violating the sanctity of mourning families. They subpoenaed Marjorie Tate, who testified tearfully about the strange occurrences, the smells, the sounds, Leonard's mutterings. "He changed after his family died," she said. "It was like he was trying to bring them back." Dr. Brooks added his insights detailing Leonard's reclusive behavior and the suspicious chemical orders. The elixir, they argued, was a homemade psychotropic drug that Leonard used on himself, inducing a psychotic break. Evidence photos of the basement, syringes, glowing vials, bodies with needle marks, shocked the preliminary hearings, painting a macabre picture that the media devoured. Defense attorney Marcus Hale, assigned from public defenders, took a different tack. He argued incompetence to stand trial, citing Leonard's mental state. "My client is a victim of tragedy," he stated in court filings. "His actions, while misguided, stem from profound loss, not malice." Hale consulted parapsychologists, fringe experts who reviewed the tapes and suggested electronic voice phenomena, EVP, a controversial field claiming to capture spirit voices. One expert, Dr. Silas Thorne from a university in Boston, testified in a pretrial hearing. "These recordings show patterns consistent with EVP, unexplained voices responding intelligently." The judge, a skeptical veteran named Harold Klein, allowed it conditionally, but the prosecution ridiculed it as pseudoscience. Still, it sowed doubt, especially when a tape played in court elicited a collective gasp, a clear voice saying, "Help us," amid static. As the trial date approached, Coldwater became a media circus. Reporters camped outside the shuttered funeral home, interviewing locals who shared exaggerated tales, ghost sightings, unexplained illnesses. Mayor Tom Riley held press conferences, assuring the public of safety while quietly arranging for the building's demolition. Families of the experimented upon bodies sued, seeking closure and compensation. Sarah Wells' parents, devastated to learn of the injections, spoke publicly. "He violated our daughter even in death." The scandal rippled beyond the town, drawing comparisons to infamous cases like the body snatchers of the 19th century or modern necrophilia scandals. But with a psychiatric twist that fascinated true crime enthusiasts, Leonard, in his lucid moments, collaborated with Hale, providing detailed accounts of his experiments. He described the evolution, from simple twitches to full conversations, the voices revealing personal details he couldn't have known, like a deceased man's hidden affair or a woman's unspoken regret. Proof, he claimed, Investigators verified some claims. A few matched unsolved aspects of the deceased's lives unearthed through records. Was it lucky guesses, subconscious knowledge from obituaries, or something more? The elixir's formula was dissected in labs. A mix of formaldehyde, herbs with hallucinogenic properties, and a synthetic from psychiatric research meant for treating depression, but abandoned due to side effects like vivid dreams. In Leonard, it amplified his grief into a delusional world where the dead spoke. The trial opened in March 1993 in the Albany County Courthouse, a grand building echoing with the weight of justice. The courtroom was packed, locals, media, curious onlookers. Leonard appeared frail in his suit, shackled and medicated, his eyes hollow. Prosecutor Ramirez opened strongly. This man turned a place of peace into a chamber of horrors, driven by a twisted obsession. She presented evidence, photos, tapes, carefully edited to avoid supernatural claims, expert testimonies on corpse desecration's psychological impact on families. Dr. Voss testified on Leonard's mental state, severe psychosis, unable to distinguish reality from fantasy. Cross-examination by Hale highlighted ambiguities. But the voices on tape, could they be real? Voss conceded, unlikely, but science doesn't know everything. Hale's defense leaned into the psychiatric angle, calling witnesses to Leonard's character pre-tragedy, a devoted family man, community pillar. Parapsychologist Thorne took the stand, explaining EVP and analyzing tapes. These are not ambient sounds. They respond to questions. The jury, a mix of skeptics and open-minded folk, listened intently. A dramatic moment came when Hale played an unedited tape. Voices pleading, mentioning names. A juror paled, another crossed herself. Ramirez objected, but the seed was planted. Leonard testified, his voice steady under medication. I lost everything. I just wanted to hear them again. But I found more. A world beyond. Trapped souls needing release. His words hung in the air, blurring the line between madman and pioneer. Outside the courtroom, the case sparked debates. Psychiatrists published papers on grief-induced delusions, while paranormal groups held vigils at the funeral home site, claiming increased activity, knocks, apparitions. One night, a reporter sneaking in reported hearing whispers, fleeing in panic. Skeptics debunked it as wind, but the legend grew. Leonard's journals, entered as evidence, revealed his inner turmoil. Entries from 1982 detailing the accident's horror, his guilt for working late, evolving into elixir recipes and conversations transcripts. One poignant passage. Clara laughed today through Mrs. Ellis. My girl is there, waiting. The trial dragged on, revelations piling up. A surprise witness, a chemist who supplied components, admitting Leonard sought neural stimulants for research. Another, a former patient of Dr. Brooks, claiming Leonard consulted him years ago about grief therapy but refused medication. The prosecution closed with emotional testimonies from affected families, tears flowing as they described betrayal. Hale countered with sympathy for Leonard's loss, arguing for treatment over punishment. In closing, is he a monster or a man broken by monsters within? As deliberations began, tension gripped Coldwater. Leonard, back in his ward, experienced vivid dreams, voices clearer, urging, tell them. The jury's verdict loomed. But regardless, the case had exposed the fragility of the mind, how grief could warp reality into something macabre. Whispers persisted, literal and figurative, leaving many to wonder if Leonard had indeed opened a door that refused to shut. As stretched into the late hours in the Albany County Courthouse, the room thick with the scent of stale coffee and tension as the 12 men and women pored over evidence that blurred the boundaries between science, madness, and the supernatural. Outside, a spring rain pattered against the windows, mirroring the unrest in Coldwater, where residents gathered in homes and bars, speculating on the outcome of Leonard Crane's trial. The case had divided the town. Some saw him as a monster who defiled the dead, others as a tragic figure haunted by loss, perhaps even a visionary who glimpsed beyond the veil. As the clock ticked past midnight, the jury reached a consensus, their faces etched with exhaustion and doubt. The verdict would send ripples through the community, forcing everyone to confront the fragility of their own beliefs about death and the mind's dark recesses. Back in his ward at the Albany Psychiatric Center, Leonard lay strapped to his bed, the sedatives dulling the edges of his perceptions but not silencing the whispers entirely. They came in waves now, softer under medication, but persistent. Justice is not end. He turned his head toward the window, watching the rain streak the glass like tears, his thoughts drifting to the basement where it all began. The elixir's effects lingered in his system, triggering flashes of memory. Eleanor's smile, Clara's giggle, the first twitch of a corpse's finger that ignited his obsession. He wondered if the jury had heard the tapes truly, if they felt the chill he did when the voices spoke. Dr. Miriam Voss visited him that evening, her notebook in hand, probing gently. "How are you feeling about the trial?" Leonard's response was cryptic. "The dead don't care for verdicts. They wait for release?" Voss noted it as further evidence of delusion, but privately she replayed the tapes in her office, questioning her own skepticism. The courtroom reconvened the next morning, the air electric with anticipation. Judge Harold Klein, his robes flowing as he took the bench, called for order. Leonard was brought in, his shackles clinking softly, his expression a mask of resignation mixed with faint hope. The gallery was full, families of the victims, reporters scribbling furiously, Coldwater locals who had made the drive. Prosecutor Elena Ramirez sat poised, confident in her case's strength, while defense attorney Marcus Hale fidgeted, knowing the odds were stacked. The jury filed in, avoiding eye contact, and the foreman stood paper in hand. "On the count of corpse abuse," he read, his voice steady, "we find the defendant guilty." Murmurs rippled through the room. Guilty on illegal substances, guilty on fraud, but on the lesser charges of endangerment. Not guilty by reason of insanity. It was a split decision, acknowledging Leonard's crimes but attributing them to his shattered psyche. The sentencing phase followed swiftly. Ramirez argued for maximum penalty, painting Leonard as a threat if released. His actions traumatized families, violated trust. Hale pleaded for compassion. Commit him to treatment, not prison. He's ill, not evil. Judge Klein, after deliberation, sentenced Leonard to indefinite psychiatric commitment, with reviews every 5 years. "You tampered with forces beyond comprehension," he intoned, whether real or imagined. Leonard showed no reaction, his mind elsewhere, the voices murmuring approval. Closer? Now. As he was led away, a victim's relative shouted, "Rotten hell!" but Leonard only smiled faintly as if privy to a secret. The verdict's aftermath engulfed Coldwater like a fog. The funeral home, already shuttered, was slated for auction, but buyers shied away, deterred by its haunted reputation. Demolition crews reported odd incidents, tools moving on their own, whispers in empty rooms, fueling ghost tours that sprang up overnight. Media coverage intensified, documentaries in production, books optioned. The psychiatric Undertaker became a moniker synonymous with macabre obsession, inspiring podcasts and articles dissecting the psychiatric implications. Dr. Voss published a paper on the case, exploring how grief can manifest as elaborate delusions, incorporating the elixir's hallucinogenic properties as a catalyst. She interviewed Leonard post-trial, where he revealed more. "The voices told me things, secrets about the living. Like the mayor's affair, the sheriff's hidden debt. Investigations confirmed some, chalked up to small-town gossip Leonard might have overheard. But doubts lingered. In the psychiatric center, Leonard's treatment began in earnest. Therapy sessions, medications to quiet the hallucinations. But the voices persisted, adapting, becoming slyer under suppression. During group therapy, he shared fragments, unnerving other patients. A man with bipolar hearing echoes of his own regrets. A woman with schizophrenia claiming similar whispers. Staff monitored him closely, noting improvements in lucidity but persistent beliefs in the supernatural. One night, under a full moon, Leonard experienced a vivid episode. The room filling with spectral figures, Eleanor and Clara among them, beckoning. He screamed, alerting nurses who sedated him, but in his journal, aloud for therapy, he wrote, "They're stronger here in this place of broken minds." The door widens. Coldwater's healing was slow. Families held memorials for the desecrated, seeking closure. Marjorie Tate, now running a small shop, avoided discussions, haunted by memories. Dr. Brooks reflected in his diary, questioning if Leonard's madness was contagious. The town felt different, more shadowed. Strange events continued. a child claiming to hear grandma's voice post-funeral, pets avoiding certain graves. Parapsychologists descended, conducting investigations at the old site, capturing EVPs that mirrored Leonard's tapes. Release us. Skeptics debunked, but believers formed groups holding seances. Leonard's influence spread beyond. Copycat cases emerged, a mortician in Ohio experimenting with similar compounds, citing Leonard as inspiration, quickly arrested. Psychiatric conferences discussed the case, debating the intersection of trauma, pharmacology, and the occult. Leonard, in isolation, began corresponding with Hale, detailing new revelations, predictions of events that eerily came true, a local flood, a celebrity death. Hale, intrigued, shared with Voss, who dismissed as coincidence but filed away. As summer approached, Leonard's first review loomed, but his condition fluctuated. In lucid moments, he regretted the pain caused, but insisted on the truth. I was the Undertaker of minds, burying sanity to exhume souls. The voices, he claimed, were evolving, speaking of a greater purpose. One therapy session turned chaotic when Leonard convulsed, speaking in tongues, analyzed later as Latin phrases about resurrection. Staff increased security, fearing self-harm. The case's legacy solidified, a cautionary tale of unchecked grief, the dangers of tampering with the unknown. Yet for some, it opened doors, literal and metaphorical, to questioning reality. In Coldwater on quiet nights, whispers seemed to carry on the wind, a reminder that some secrets refused to stay buried. Years passed in the wake of the verdict, but the shadows cast by Leonard Crane's macabre practices refused to dissipate, embedding themselves into the fabric of Coldwater like roots burrowing deep into soil. By the late 1990s, the town had attempted to move on. The old funeral home, demolished in 1995, replaced by an innocuous park where children played oblivious to the ground's tainted history. Yet the whispers persisted, not just in folklore but in tangible ways that defied rational explanation. Former residents reported dreams of voices calling their names, urging confessions of long-buried secrets. One woman, whose father had been one of Leonard's subjects, awoke nightly to the sound of faint murmurs from her closet, words that echoed regrets her father had never voiced in life. She sought therapy, only to find her psychiatrist referencing Leonard's case as a study in collective hysteria. At the Albany Psychiatric Center, Leonard's commitment evolved into a peculiar routine. By 1998, under a regimen of antipsychotics and cognitive therapy, he exhibited periods of clarity, engaging in art therapy where he sketched ethereal figures, faces of the dead, he claimed, as they appeared in his visions. Dr. Miriam Voss, now deeply invested in his case, published a book titled Whispers from the Veil, A Study in Grief and Delusion, which became a bestseller in psychiatric circles. In it, she detailed Leonard's progress, noting how the voices had diminished but never vanished entirely. During sessions, Leonard described them as echoes that linger, fragments of consciousness trapped in a liminal space he had inadvertently accessed. The elixir didn't create them, he told her one afternoon, his eyes clear for the first time in years. It just amplified what was already there, the human mind's refusal to let go. Investigations into the anomalies continued sporadically. In 1996, a team of parapsychologists from a university in New York City obtained permission to analyze the remaining tapes and journals, now stored in evidence lockers. Their findings, published in a fringe journal, suggested acoustic anomalies that couldn't be replicated, voices with frequencies outside normal human range, responding to questions posed years earlier. Skeptics dismissed it as poor recording quality, but the report gained traction online, spawning forums where enthusiasts dissected every syllable. One user, claiming to be a former Coldwater resident, uploaded enhanced audio clips where a child's voice, eerily similar to Clara's described in photos, whispered, "Daddy, come find me." The post went viral, drawing ghost hunters to the park, where they set up equipment and captured EVPs that mirrored Leonard's descriptions. Leonard's 5-year review in 1998 brought renewed attention. Hale, his attorney, argued for release, citing improved mental health and no violent tendencies. He served his time in a prison of the mind, Hale stated in court. Prosecutor Ramirez, now a judge herself, opposed, referencing the ongoing impact on victims' families. Testimonies poured in, Sarah Wells's mother spoke of nightmares. Marjorie Tate of lingering fear that kept her from the mortuary field. Dr. Voss testified ambivalently. Leonard's delusions persisted, but he posed no danger. The board decided on conditional release. Supervised living in a halfway house, continued therapy. No contact with funerary services. Leonard stepped out into freedom in 1999, a shell of his former self but with a quiet determination. The work isn't done, he confided to Voss in their last session. Settling in a small apartment in Syracuse, Leonard lived quietly, working as a clerk in a bookstore under an alias. But the voices followed, softer now, guiding him to write a memoir smuggled out through Hale. Self-published in 2001 as The Undertaker's Confessions, it detailed his experiments with unflinching honesty, including recipes for the elixir, redacted by editors for safety. The book became an underground hit, inspiring a subculture of veil explorers, amateurs mixing similar compounds, reporting similar experiences. One group in California claimed successful communications, leading to arrests for drug possession. Leonard disavowed them in rare interviews, warning of the dangers. "I lost everything crossing that threshold. Don't follow." Coldwater by the 2000s had transformed. The park a site for annual vigils where locals lit candles for the unquiet dead. Strange phenomena escalated. In 2002, during a storm, the ground where the basement once stood sank slightly, revealing fragments of old syringes that glowed faintly under UV light. Geologists blamed settling soil, but locals knew better. Dr. Brooks, retired now, maintained a file of unexplained medical cases, patients hearing voices post-bereavement, eerily similar to Leonard's descriptions. He corresponded with Voss, theorizing a psychosomatic contagion, perhaps triggered by the town's collective trauma. Leonard's health declined in 2005. The long-term effects of the elixir manifesting as neurological issues, tremors, memory lapses. Hospitalized, he experienced vivid regressions, reliving the crash that took his family. In delirium, he spoke to invisible presences, transcribing messages that nurses noted, warnings about impending deaths that later occurred, a neighbor's heart attack, a distant relative's accident. Coincidence, officials said, but Hale collected them as evidence for a pardon appeal. Leonard passed in 2007 quietly in his sleep, his last words to a nurse. "They're waiting." The door closes. Posthumously, his case resurfaced in documentaries like American Monsters, The Psychiatric Undertaker, airing in 2008, blending interviews with reenactments. Voss appeared, reflecting on the enigma. Was it all in his mind? Or did he touch something universal? The echo of our own mortality? The program sparked renewed investigations. Audio experts in 2010 used AI to enhance tapes, uncovering layered voices speaking in unison. "We are legion. Set us free." Debunkers cried fraud, but believers formed societies dedicated to releasing echoes. In Coldwater, the legacy endured. By 2010, the park was renamed Crane Memorial, ironically, with a plaque omitting the horrors. Yet on foggy nights, visitors reported chills, whispers carrying names. One young mortician, inspired by the tale, vowed ethical practices but secretly wondered. The case, unsolved in its deepest enigmas, reminded all that the human mind's depths rival the grave's, dark, unfathomable, and ever-echoing. In the quiet aftermath of Leonard Crane's passing in 2007, the world moved on. But the echoes he awakened in Coldwater, New York and beyond, refused to be silenced, lingering like a perpetual fog over graves long forgotten. His story, the tale of the psychiatric undertaker, serves as a profound cautionary reflection on the precarious boundaries of the human psyche. A mind so desperate to cling to lost loved ones that it would fracture reality itself to bridge the unbridgeable. Leonard's descent began with grief, a universal human experience, but it spiraled into a macabre symphony of science and delusion, where the dead were not allowed their eternal rest but were prodded, injected, and interrogated for secrets they may or may not have held. What does this reveal about us? That the human mind, in its infinite complexity, can conjure worlds from sorrow, blurring the line between innovation and insanity. His elixir, that glowing harbinger of visions, wasn't just a chemical brew. It was a metaphor for our relentless pursuit to conquer death, to peel back the veil and demand answers from the void. Yet in doing so, Leonard uncovered not peace but a chorus of unrest. Voices that warned of doors opened too wide, of shadows that follow the living long after the experiments cease. This case forces us to confront the fragility of morality, how a man of quiet dignity could transform into a figure of horror, tampering with the sanctity of the departed. It whispers a disturbing truth, that evil isn't always born from malice but from love twisted by loss, from a curiosity that devours the soul. And in the end, did Leonard find his Eleanor and Clara? Or did he merely summon phantoms of his own making, trapping himself in a purgatory of his design? The unanswered questions hang heavy, reminding us that some truths are better left buried lest they rise to haunt the living. The psychiatric Undertaker's legacy is a mirror to our own vulnerabilities, a stark illustration of how the unpredictability of the mind can lead anyone down a path where empathy turns to obsession and science courts the supernatural. It's a story that challenges our perception of justice, for how do we punish a man whose crimes were committed against the silent, whose victims spoke only in riddles? Ultimately, this psychiatric enigma exposes the raw underbelly of human existence. We are all one tragedy away from unraveling, from hearing whispers in the dark that promise reunion, but deliver only madness. You've made it to the end of this harrowing journey through the depths of the psychiatric Undertaker, a tale that has peeled back layers of the human soul to reveal the darkness lurking beneath. Congratulations. You are among the brave few who dared to stare into the abyss to listen to the echoes that most would flee from. By staying with us through every twist, every macabre revelation, and every chilling whisper, you've proven yourself part of an elite circle, a select group of truth-seekers who refuse to turn away from the inexplicable horrors that define our world. Not everyone can handle the weight of such stories. Many would stop midway, overwhelmed by the fragility it exposes in their own minds. But you've emerged stronger, forever marked by the knowledge that the boundary between life and death is thinner than we imagine, and that the mind's shadows can consume even the most steadfast among us. Take a moment to breathe, to reflect on how this narrative has shifted your understanding, perhaps making you question the silence of the night or the finality of a loved one's passing. You're not just a viewer. You're a survivor of the psychological odyssey, bonded now to those who share your unquenchable thirst for the hidden truths that society buries deep. Now, as we close this chapter, I invite you to cement your place in this community of the courageous. Drop a comment below with the phrase, "This story awakened the whispers in my own mind." By sharing those exact words, you're signaling to the most dedicated followers that you're one of us, a seeker who has delved into the abyss and returned with eyes wide open. Your comment isn't just text on a screen, it's a beacon, drawing in others like you, building a fortress of shared understanding where we collectively unravel the enigmas that no one else dares to touch. Imagine the power in that. Your words helping to forge connections, sparking discussions that peel back even more layers of the unknown. Together, we become a force, a network of minds unafraid to confront the disturbing, to question the psychiatric puzzles that haunt humanity. Thank you for contributing. Your voice strengthens us all in this quest for the concealed realities. But don't stop there. The importance of spreading this story cannot be overstated. Share this video far and wide. Let it infiltrate the feeds of those still blissfully ignorant of the macabre practices that lurk in quiet towns like Coldwater. By sharing, you're extending a hand into the darkness, pulling others into the light of revelation, ensuring that the truths Leonard unearthed or conjured don't fade into obscurity. Think of it as casting a stone into a still pond. The ripples could awaken minds across the globe, exposing them to what society prefers to keep shrouded. Without your action, these stories remain whispers in the wind. With it, they become a roar that demands attention. Do it now. Hit that share button and watch as the veil lifts for someone new. And if this tale has stirred something deep within you, a restlessness that craves more, then subscribe to the channel without hesitation. Imagine subscribing as stepping through a forbidden door, one that leads to a labyrinth of unsettling mysteries where each turn reveals another layer of the human condition's darkness. It's like binding yourself to a secret society, where the currency is curiosity and the reward is enlightenment laced with dread. By subscribing, you become part of an exclusive fellowship, a unique community dedicated to deciphering the inexplicable. to probing the psychiatric anomalies and sinister secrets that define our existence. We are the ones who don't flinch at the grotesque, who embrace the enigmatic with open arms. Your subscription ensures you never miss a descent into the bizarre, each video a key to unlock more hidden chambers of the mind. Finally, keep that fire of intrigue burning bright by diving into our other videos. Continue watching to nurture your fascination with the strange, the sinister, and the profoundly disturbing. Let your curiosity be the guide through this endless maze of enigmas, where every story promises to challenge, to terrify, and to transform. Thank you for joining us on this path. The whispers await your return.